So I'm here with some slithery companions, some creepy crawlies, things that slither and stick their tongues out at you when you look at them. My name is Christina. I run the Northeastern Reptile Welfare League, which is a non-profit reptile education and rescue organization. And I decided to bring some of our wonderful slithery companions here today just to kind of introduce them to you and hopefully dispel some of their fears and concerns that you might have about snakes. So I'm going to get started. One of the things I tend to do is start with the smallest creature and work our way up to the biggest one. The biggest animal I have here today is about 43 pounds. So if it's an animal that you're allowed to touch, I will bring it up to you, talk to you about it as I'm walking by. If you're afraid and you don't want to touch the animal, that's perfectly okay. A couple of the animals I have you're not allowed to touch, so I will stay up here at the table while I talk about them. So, this little guy right here is a western hognose snake. And he's called a hognose snake because if you look at his snout, it kind of turns up like a little pig's nose there. And these guys, unfortunately, they get a lot of persecution. One of the reasons is he looks kind of like something more dangerous, looks kind of like a rattlesnake here, right? A lot of harmless snakes look like something more dangerous than they are, and unfortunately when people see them, they do harm to them because they're afraid that they're going to hurt them. Hognose snakes are really interesting. I call them the drama queens of the snake world because their natural defense, if you go up and you're trying to threaten him or hurt him, he's actually going to put on quite a display. The first thing he's going to do is he's going to flatten out his head and try to make him look as big and scary as possible. Even though we don't have cobras here in the United States, he'll actually put on a display that makes him almost look like a cobra. And if that doesn't work and you still bother him, he's actually going to flip onto his back, writhe around, stick his tongue out, and pretend that he's dead. And if you try to flip him over while he's pretending he's dead, he's just going to keep flipping himself back onto his back. So one of the reasons he has an upturned snout like that is actually that their primary food item is frogs. Having that nose actually really helps him bite onto a frog. If you've ever picked up a frog in the wild, you know how they puff up and look really big. It'd be kind of hard to swallow something that's inflated like a balloon. Unless you had an upturned snout like that, that really helps him to eat a frog. Now, those of you who've touched this snake notice that he's not slimy and he's actually very rough, has very rough scales. You know, almost it's almost like a sandy texture. And that allows him to dig easier into the sand and the dirt. These guys like to burrow, and having rough scales like that actually really help them to burrow. We do have hognose snakes native to New England. This guy's from the western United States. There's a type of hognose snake called the eastern hognose snake that's actually critically endangered in our area. And the difference between the western and the eastern hognose snakes have more red on them. One of the things you'll notice, it's kind of cool out today, right? You know, reptiles, they regulate their body temperature by the air around them. They're cold-blooded. They can't produce their own body heat. Mostly. I actually have a reptile with me today that kind of breaks that rule. And I'm going to bring him out. So this is an Argentine tegu. These guys are from Argentina. He's a young tegu. He's only about 2 years old. But you can reach out and pet him gently on his back. And the reason he breaks the rule of being cold-blooded is that scientists have recently discovered that during certain times of the year, tegus are actually capable of metabolizing their own body heat. They can be partially warm-blooded certain times of the year when they're hibernating to try to keep their bodies from getting too cold.
I'm pretty sure my dad would like to touch him.
And you'll notice he has that really long tongue, very similar to a snake's. He's sticking his tongue out, smelling things around him. Just like snakes, tegus use their tongues to smell food and smell the air around them. They stick out their tongue, and that tongue is collecting scent molecules from the air. He's getting a little fidgety. I'm just going to try to keep him calm here.
Such big feet.
Yeah, he does have those big feet. Tegus are actually omnivores. They'll eat just about anything. In the wild, they'll eat things like carrion, bird eggs, other lizards and small snakes and reptiles. They'll also eat bugs, but they'll also eat things like fruit and vegetation. So one of his treats that he likes squash and things like that. He will get about 2 to 3 times the size. He's still kind of a baby. Argentine tegus at full size, they can be little bit bigger than a large cat. So he's still kind of a baby right now. And as their name suggests, Argentine tegus, of course, are from Argentina. Unfortunately, there are a lot of tegus starting to pop up in Florida. People get these guys as pets when they're little, and obviously when he's about this size, he's not too much of a hassle. But when he's weighing 10, 15 pounds and running around the size of cats, some people realize, oh, it gets a little bigger than I anticipated it would be. And unfortunately, if they don't do their research and they don't make wise decisions, sometimes they release them out into the wild, which in New England, we wouldn't have too much of an issue if he got out. Unfortunately, he would not survive the winter. But in places like Florida, where a lot of these are getting released, they're actually becoming an invasive species. Tegus like the Burmese pythons and some of the African rats that are loose in Florida are decimating wildlife populations because these guys, they're not picky about what they eat. These guys are not afraid of raiding alligator nests. They're not afraid of raiding birds' nests. So if you have the native alligator populations being threatened by a little guy like this simply because he likes the, yeah. So he's getting a little riled up here. I'm going to put him back. Can anybody tell me, is this a venomous snake? Do you think this is venomous? What do you think? No? Probably wouldn't be holding him like this if he was. Does anybody know the rhyme?
Red touches black, friend is Jack. Red touches yellow, kill a
Yeah, so there is a kind of saying that we have here in the United States. Unfortunately, I got clawed up by the tegu there. Red touches black, friend of Jack. Red touches white or yellow, it will kill a fellow. And as you can see, this guy, he's got red banding with black banding around it, followed by that white. He's a Pueblan milk snake, perfectly harmless snake, but he uses that coloration to kind of trick predators into thinking he's more dangerous than he is. A lot of snakes, they don't want to be bothered by predators. They don't want you to eat them. So they use camouflage and they use bluffing and they try to make you believe they're something that they're not. Snakes are probably some of the most effective costume wearers. So if he's slithering around in a cat or something that's come into contact with a more dangerous snake, like a coral snake, which is very, very deadly, would think, oh, maybe that's not something I should mess with, and he might be able to slither away without any problem. This particular species of milk snake is native to Mexico. This guy came to me from somebody who had him as a pet that they could no longer care for. He actually had a bit of an injury on his neck, which has since healed, but now he has kind of like a permanent little kink in his neck. So it gives him a little character. It doesn't bother him or hurt him. He can eat fine. He sheds okay. And he's about 12 years old now. So one common misconception with reptiles is that they are easy pets that don't live very long. That's absolutely not true. Every animal I've brought with me today can live to at least 15 to 20 years. So just because a snake might be considered a low maintenance pet, just remember that they do live a long time. They're called milk snakes, and the theory is the reason they're called milk snakes is because farmers would find them in the barns, and the wives' tale was that the snakes would actually drink milk from the cows' udders. Snakes don't drink milk. These guys like mice, and that's why they were found in the barns around the cows and the dairy barns, because these guys are going after the mice. They're actually a really good beneficial animal to have if you do have a farm, because they're going to eat a lot of those rodents and pests that would otherwise spread disease or get into your food grain and things like that. We're going to go back to critters of South America. This is a Brazilian rainbow boa. And what's really interesting about boa constrictors is that they don't lay eggs. This particular type of snake is from Brazil, South America. They're found in the rainforests. And she's really good at climbing trees, so she can hold on and actually hold out almost half of her body straight out, waiting for a bird to fly by. Yeah, the one mentioned in the Harry Potter book, the first one he met was a boa constrictor. As far as we know, it was a common boa constrictor. This one's a Brazilian rainbow boa. So there's a lot of different types of boa constrictors. They all come in different sizes and colors. She's actually getting ready to shed right now, so her color is not as vivid as it normally would be. Just when a snake's getting ready to shed, basically what happens is their skin gets dull and cloudy looking. But if she wasn't getting ready to shed, her coloration would actually have a really bright iridescence to it. And that's why they're called rainbow boas, is because they do have a very bright iridescent sheen to their skin under natural light. No, she's not trying to constrict me. Basically, constrictors, they really want to save their energy. All reptiles want to save their energy, so they don't go after to attack you, because it's really not worth it unless you're threatening them. She's just holding on to me partially because I'm warm. It's a little cool here today, so she likes the warmth of my body. She's also climbing me. Like I said, this type of snake likes to spend a lot of time in the trees, so she's really good at climbing, and she's going to try to go for the highest space that she can. So I'm basically like a big tree branch to her right now. Brazilian rainbow boas are actually one of the slowest growing boa constrictors. She's about 7 or 8 years old. We're not entirely sure. She did come to us as a rescue. But she could easily live 20 to 30 years old.
I don't want it.
All reptiles that have what we call the Jacobson's organ. It's basically a specialized organ in the roof of their mouth that allows them to really capture a lot more information from the environment around them. And cats also have that same organ. So if you ever looked at a cat, and we call it the stinky face when they're kind of going like that. Well, basically what it is the cat is getting information by breathing in air and moving it over that Jacobson's organ. Reptiles have developed that characteristic over millions of years. They've really perfected it. So having that long tongue to help capture information and scents and smells and movement in the air helps them out. The next animal I'm going to bring out, I may bring him around to let you touch him, or I may not. It really depends on how his mood turns out to be. It's not a snake, it is a lizard. But if he's acting a little rambunctious or seeming like he's a little nervous, if you could just stay seated, and I'll just stand up here with him if he starts acting out. If he's fine and calm, and if you stay calm, I will bring him around so you can touch him if you want. So like I said, a lot of the animals, you can touch him. The gloves are not necessarily because he's mean or aggressive. It's just because he's designed to climb trees. He's got very, very sharp claws. And that little tegu did scratch me up a little bit earlier. This next animal is quite a bit larger and has much larger claws. So I'm using the gloves only for my protection, just so that I don't get scratched up. So if he's in a good mood, I will bring him around. So you probably all recognize what it is, huh? An iguana. This is Bubby. He's a green iguana. And these guys are native to Central and South America, but they've also migrated to lots of different regions. They're found in Costa Rica and a lot of the Caribbean islands. I'm going to walk around. If you want to touch him, just put your hand out gently, and I will move him closer to you so you can touch him. Just pet him gently on his side, and while he's still calm, he's not going to bite you. He'll just try to. If he's getting nervous, I'll know, and I'll move him away. So just pet him on his side there. And as scary and menacing as he's looking with all those spikes and those sharp claws and things like that, iguanas are actually vegetarians. He eats leaves and vegetables and squash and flowers and things like that. These guys would spend all their time up in the trees, munching on veggies. Unfortunately, iguanas are probably one of the hardest, even though they're a very common reptile. A lot of people see them. You see the little bright green lizards in pet stores. They're actually one of the harder reptiles to take care of. Reasons for that being, well, obviously he gets very big. He needs to have a large enclosure with things to climb on. His enclosure basically has to be the size of a walk-in closet or bigger if you can provide it. Also, because even though they're vegetarians, they actually have to have a lot of variety in their diet. You can't just give them a lettuce salad and hope that he'll be healthy. They need to have a lot of variety of vegetables in their diet to provide all the minerals and nutrients they can. And unfortunately, the large majority of iguanas in captivity are extremely malnourished and not taken care of properly. So because of that reason, iguanas are actually now regulated in the state of Vermont. You can't have an iguana you can't buy an iguana in the state of Vermont without a permit. And the reason for that being is the Fish and Game Department realized that there were so many of these animals either being dumped or neglected that they decided that, unfortunately, that's not a good idea for people to be able to just go out and buy them as pets. And some of you might notice that his tail actually looks a little stubby at the end. And the reason for that being, iguanas have the ability to actually detach their tails. So what had happened with Bubby, he had an injury to the end of his tail. Unfortunately, instead of the tail breaking off, that injury became infected. We actually had to have part of his tail surgically amputated to keep the infection from spreading. Sometimes they do grow their tails back. Younger iguanas, certainly ones in the wild, they are more likely to grow their tails back. Because Bubby's around 8 to 10 years old, he's an older iguana. He doesn't necessarily need his whole tail for defense because he's already pretty big. Predators aren't going to bother him. So he hasn't really shown any sign that he's going to regrow his tail back. So sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But for the most part, when they're an older iguana, if they lose their tail, they don't grow it back. So in the wild, his predators would be things like big cats, dogs, things like that. These guys are native to like Central and South America, so you have like jaguars and ocelots and things like that that would eat them. Birds, certainly like eagles and hawks would go after them. In Florida, where they've kind of established themselves as a native, even though they're not originally native to Florida, things like crocodiles and alligators will eat them as well. Yes? So the last animal I'm going to bring out is the largest animal I have today. I'm not going to carry him around and let you touch him. It's a state-regulated species. I'm not allowed to let people pet him in the state of Vermont. So I'm going to put him up on the table here and hope that he fits on the table. So this is Levi. He is a Burmese python. He's actually an albino Burmese python, so that's why he's kind of this yellow color. He doesn't have the same pigmentation in his skin that he would in the wild. Burmese pythons, they're native to Southeast Asia, Thailand, Indonesia area. Unfortunately, they've also established themselves in places like Florida where foolish pet owners release them and don't do the research. The irony of that being in the places they're native to, they're actually facing a lot of problems from habitat loss. In the places where they come from, they're hunted because people fear them. Also, some people hunt them for their skins in the exotic leather industry. Also, things like deforestation and palm oil production are also leading to a lot of loss of their native habitat. Levi is about 9 feet long. These guys have the potential, female Burmese pythons can easily reach 15 to 20 feet long. He weighs about 43 pounds. An adult female Burmese python, full size, could easily weigh up to 100 or more pounds. And these guys, once they're big, they don't have a lot of natural predators. He could easily eat something like a good-sized cat, small dog, small alligator, things like that. I feed him 3-pound rabbits once every 3 weeks. He has very slow metabolism, so he doesn't have to eat too often. He's actually getting ready to shed as well, so he's kind of got that milky coloration to him because he is getting ready to shed. Levi was actually one of my first animals that I acquired long before Burmese pythons were regulated in the state of Vermont, so I have had him since the beginning. He's about 15 years old, so he's about middle-aged for a Burmese python. If he's cared for properly, as long as he doesn't have any major medical problems, he could easily live to 20 or 30 years old. Burmese pythons, unlike boa constrictors, they do lay eggs. The female Burmese pythons actually have the ability to kind of create heat for their eggs by coiling them around them and vibrating their bodies to produce a little bit of heat for their babies. But as big and scary as Burmese pythons are, we're actually finding some really cool things about these guys. These guys are actually starting to be used in medical research, and the reason for that being is when a Burmese python eats its food, its heart can actually double in size. So when he's resting, his heart's small, he doesn't have to use a lot of energy, he's not pumping a lot of blood, but when he eats a really big meal, he has to produce a lot of energy to digest that meal, and so he actually has the ability to make his heart grow. Scientists and researchers are actually studying the process behind that to use for medical purposes. So if you have people with heart problems, undersized hearts, problems like that, they're actually trying to find the protein and the process that happens with these guys that allows their heart to grow. And snakes in general, there are a lot of beneficial things we're finding with them. Venomous snakes, things like copperheads, rattlesnakes, we're finding their venom actually contain proteins in them that can be used for cancer research, for curing cancers. Also things like antibiotic resistant, things like that. So reptiles in general, they have a lot of secrets, a lot of things that we are finding that are very beneficial to us. Large snake like these guys, they don't move particularly fast. They're ambush predators, so they pretty much just sit and wait for something to move by. He wouldn't have much of a chance to chase something down. He doesn't move particularly fast. He actually moves, instead of slithering like small snakes, you've seen garter snakes move really quickly. If he was stretched out, he would actually mostly be completely stretched out, and he would actually crawl on his belly. Instead of slithering, he actually uses the muscles on his So Burmese pythons, they're considered a dangerous species. We have a general rule in the reptile keeping world that anything over any snake over 8 feet long, you do want to kind of handle with supervision. They tested the squeezing power of pythons like this and found that they can crush with about 100 pounds per foot of snake. So a big snake like this, he weighs about, he's about 9 feet long. So estimate that he could squeeze with about 900 pounds of force. Obviously, if you're an inexperienced keeper or you don't have the proper precautions for handling them, if he was upset or was trying to harm you, unfortunately he could hurt me really badly. And because of that, Burmese pythons they basically consider them a species that shouldn't necessarily be kept by the average person in the state of Vermont. New Hampshire doesn't have the same regulations, and one of the things I run into a lot as a rescue kind of on the border of Vermont and New Hampshire are the two very, very different laws between the states. Pet stores don't necessarily check the laws in states that they're not native to, so you could go to a pet store in New Hampshire and buy something that's illegal to have in the state of Vermont. And unfortunately, it is on you as a pet owner to do your research of an animal before you go out and buy it. Check the laws with your state, make sure that you have the proper habitat for the animal you're keeping, because these guys do require a lot of specialized care. They don't make enclosures commercially available on the market to house something like this. You have to build something yourself, so you have to be kind of crafty too. Most of my enclosures I've actually hand built for these guys, so and that can get very expensive as well. Well, if he sheds in one nice big piece, I do keep the skin, just because it's kind of cool thing to have. Unfortunately, because he is such a big, clumsy snake, usually when he's shedding, it rips up in pieces and he poops all over and it makes a big mess. So. But most snakes, when they are shedding properly, it does come off all in one piece. Yes? How does he drink? He sticks his nose in the water, he goes. So obviously having a long forked tongue isn't so good for catching water. So they basically have to stick their mouths in the water to drink because they don't use their tongue like a dog to lap up the water. Any other questions? Yes? He is not. And he's not venomous either. So I asked, what is the difference between poison and venom? Well, it's not correct to say snakes can't be poisonous because there is actually a couple species of snakes that are poisonous, but of the majority of snakes that are potentially dangerous, we call that venomous. And the difference between venom and poison is if it bites you and you die, that's venom. If you bite it and you die, then that's poison. Snakes like cobras and rattlesnakes, things like that, those are the types of snakes that are venomous. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much for coming in and checking out my little reptile friends, and I hope you enjoyed getting to see them.